We're native Houstonians, and John's the fourth of eight. I'm the seventh of eight. Our sister Marilyn was the fifth. And to just I want to give you a context of our family and how it all came down. But my whole message today, and I looked at this one verse, finally be strengthened by the Lord, this is Ephesians 6:10. Be strengthened by the Lord and his vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. What happened to our sister was evil, and God allows evil to happen, but what we do with it is critical. I don't think we ever suffer just for ourselves. It's for the next person. And when you're in it, and I'm sure that you've all been through it, or you're in between sieges, or you're maybe in an uphill battle right now, and I hope that this will bless you for that. Our story may not be familiar with yours, but I think you'll see the similarities in any struggle. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens. For this reason, take up the full armor of God, so that you may be able to resist an evil day, and having prepared everything to take your stand, stand therefore with truth like a belt around your waist, righteousness like armor on your chest, and your feet sandaled with readiness for the gospel of peace. So we really did face evil, and it was quite a journey to peace. You tell you a little bit about growing up with all these brothers and sisters. I was the caboose for a while, and 6 years later, my little brother knocked me out of the throne. But there were 4 girls and 4 boys, and our parents came from, in the Old Testament, the lineage of Christ was lined up, and David, and all his papers were in order. And if you hovered 20,000 feet above our family, you could see, like, our granddad was a Methodist minister, and our other granddad was a staunch Irish Catholic, very devout in his faith. So there was a long time before we ever got on this earth that faith was really important in our family, and it was just a dynamic that was always there. We were raised Catholic, and I mean, it wasn't, are you going to Mass on Sunday? It's, are you going at 9:30 or 11? And if you, the only reason you didn't go was if you were too sick and you had to stay in bed all Sunday. So things were, we went to Catholic school, St. Anne's. Johnny played football at St. Thomas, and he was always captain of the team, and we got so excited for each other's activities. Older brother Bill played at St. Thomas football and ran track at Rice, and we would get so excited going to those track meets and those football games, and anything that happened, one of us really happened to all of us, and kind of 4 point. And I went to LSU and had the same math professor, and I'm struggling with algebra, and I'm more language, not math. And she looked at me and she went, Helen Sage, you're not John Sage's sister. Yeah, we used to tease my dad that he was an only child because of the football and everything. And so the girls, a lot of times sort of waited on the guys, and Irish Catholic, we served their plates and everything, but we all sat down to dinner every night together. And Marilyn was in a big family. The older ones really look after the younger ones. She took me shopping. She took me with her and her friends everywhere. When I was in high school, I went to LSU and stayed with her in the dorm. I remember, any of you Houstonians remember that bomb at Poe Elementary in 1959? I was born in 54, so I was 5 then. I was deathly afraid that the school was going to blow up. Deathly afraid. Marilyn, they took me out of school for a while in kindergarten. So first grade, Marilyn walks me to the door, and she says, now I'll be right upstairs if you need me. And that's how it was, having a big sister like Marilyn. She wasn't just my sister, she was my guardian, my best friend. She was my greatest cheerleader as an adult. She was always saying, I was doing stand-up comedy, and she would, Helen, you gotta get down, and they're having the funniest person in America contest. You gotta go down to Tranquility Park, get your stuff and go down there and do this. And she believed I could do anything, which was very biased and probably got me into some trouble sometimes. But we just really were a team. To have that taken away from us, when the call came, Johnny's wife, Frances, who Marilyn introduced to them in high school, she was an incurable matchmaker. And fun, we did pranks, we did more fun. We could walk into a room together and she could work a crowd like, she just lit up a room. She was beautiful and it was a big smile. But I'd like to talk about when the call came. Have you ever had a call that comes and you think of your life as before that and after that, and everything has changed? And Frances said, well, Marilyn's dead. Somebody hit her over the head. And your first thing is denial, and you can't even, the trauma of it. And that knowingness keeps haunting you over and over again when you first knew of that fact, that trauma. We all went to her apartment where there were police and ambulances, and it just seemed surreal. I watched everybody in the family go through such pain, and I watched John suffer from a really rough depression. He lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks, I think. It was kind of like the lights were on, but nobody was home. We were all pretty much the walking wounded. Fortunately, the police did find the two killers. They were 19-year-old. It was just a random carjacking. They saw her carrying clothes in, and she left the trunk open, and they got in. And you know how you'll leave your door open in between trips, and they got in that door and stabbed her, and they wanted a car. And Houston police worked round the clock to find them. I'll let you take it from there, John.
So I'm a sophomore at age 16, and she comes home and she says, Johnny, there's these two gorgeous girls in my class. She said, one blonde, one brunette. Would you go out with them? And I said, oh yeah, twist my arm. And I did. I went out with each of them a few times, and I don't know, 65 years ago or 60-something years ago, and I'm still going out with the brunette. That's kind of the relationship. And we've been married 55 years, and we dated for 5.5. So anyway, that's 61 years ago. And that was the kind of relationship. So that sort of bonded us with my wife and her were very close friends in the same classes, and they had a group called the We Five, and there was 5 girls, and one other girl wanted to be in, and they didn't want to do it, so they called it We Five Plus One, and to this day, the other, whichever one was plus one, she's still plus one. But then we went to LSU, and she was a year behind me, and another cute story to show you our bonding. We shared a car. We had an old stick shift on the column. I think this crowd remembers those with the clutch. And our football buddies say, you don't need to lift weights, just go drive your car around a little bit. But anyway, we shared this car, no cell phones or anything. So we had a schedule, a pattern. We had 2 sets of keys, and I'd leave it at a certain place in the parking lot. But I'd put a basket of dirty clothes in the trunk, and 2 days later she'd bring it back, and all my clothes were washed and everything. And so that was, and she got all my football buddies' dates. So to say we were close, it'd be an understatement. It was really very close, and we just spent. I think I spent more time with her in my first 20 years of life, more than any other person, including my mother, because we just did so many things together. So that was the setting and the background of our relationship. And then my wife and I, she had some medical problems, and we wanted children, and after about 9 years we adopted a child, and then she got pregnant 5 months later, but that's how but anyway, during those years, we just borrowed Marilyn's kids. We helped raise her 2 kids, and it was a joy, and we just that kind of a union. So her murder was beyond devastating. It just sunk me to the ground and knocked me out. I mean, it was unbelievable. Then we went over to the site, like Helen talked about, and you just end up facing evil right in the eye. Helen read out of Ephesians that, I mean, you see that dark, and you have to be careful not to just become cynical that the whole world's dark, and I felt that way for a while. The trauma, post-traumatic stress, depression, physical ailments. I just was operating at not even half speed at first. So anyway, I went through a journey. One great thing about my Catholic upbringing, or faith upbringing, Christian schools, was I knew where to go when I got in trouble. So I never got angry at God. I never cussed God. I asked the question why maybe 1,000 times over 5 years, but I knew that if anything was going to work, turning to my faith. So I went on a deeper spiritual journey. I probably read more books in those 5 years. I'm not a big-time reader than I did in the rest of my adult life since college. All were spiritual books, mostly Christian spiritual books. And I just went on a journey, and the Lord really, I think, guided me on this journey, and I didn't realize at the time. I went through 7 steps that were changing, life-changing, and like Helen said, I kind of call my old life my new life. And as I look back from a 30,000-foot viewpoint, it was sort of my rebirth, quite frankly. And the steps I went through, and the first one I think is the most important for any Christian, is surrender. Surrender my will to the will of God. I read a book that said, your life's not about you, and my first reaction, who the heck is it about? It's not about me, but truly it's about others and about serving God's will. And but you have to surrender your own ego and your own will. And a guy told me one time, I'll grab this pamphlet, this is an example. He said, you get the manila envelope and you hand it over to God, but you hold on to the corner. And I did that for 10 years prior to that. I was trying to get on the journey. I was trying to surrender, but I was holding on to that piece of me too much. But during that time, I can honestly say I went through a total surrender to the will of God. And then I spent 5 years in this journey. Second step was humility, to study that it's not about me, and it's really with God's power that we can do things, and our faith in God. I went through another step on realizing how much God loves me. We were taught to know, love, and serve God, but I don't think I got enough of God's love in my mind and my heart. And I was in a BSF Bible study, and we were studying John 17. You can read John 17, it's still one of the most powerful chapters for me, and how much God loves us, and he loves us the same way that he loved his son Jesus. So that was real helpful. Then I got through a period of kind of accepting where I was. I was in mid-40s or so, and that's the area of midlife crisis and things like that. You kind of question things, but in addition to that, my faith. And then I went through a period of gratitude for what I had and looking at what I still have, not what I've lost. And then forgiveness was the 6th step. Of course, forgiving these people that murdered my sister was a huge. I mean, at first, I was so angry. The trial of the first one was a man. It was a guy and a female, both killers. They both participated. They both ended up going to death row. But in the trial of the first one, I literally saw myself going up and choking him to death. I literally, I could just see, and a little voice said, "Don't do that. You got a wife and kids." But in all honesty, I think if they put me in a room with him, I could have killed somebody, and I had to live with that. I was that angry and that distraught. The girl, I don't think I could have strangled a female, but I was just as angry. So I had to live with that, and it turns out I was in my own prison of anger, prison of hate. I was just inside. I was like water at 210 degrees. I was on edge. It just wasn't working for me. And that's when I started these steps of surrender and going through that. And the 7th step I went through is kind of much like AA's 12th step, is go out and help someone else. Go out and help someone else. Maybe share what you've learned through this journey. And so I look back at that time, and I really think it was a rebirth of the Holy Spirit, rebirth, however you want to say it. It didn't happen in a moment like Nicodemus, but it happened in a season. And my life has not been the same since. And so on the basis of that, in 1998, I volunteered for a prison program out here in Richmond. And it was put on by a prison fellowship ministry, which was Chuck Colson's. It was called Sycamore Tree, out of the Gospel of Luke, where Zacchaeus climbed in the tree, and then Jesus asked him to come down, and he paid back all the money, restitution, forgiveness, and because he was crippling the whole city with taxes. So I went through that program, and I was just inspired by what happened. There was 12 of us volunteered for it. It was a brand new concept, and we actually went in and met with inmates of all different type crimes, not the inmates that offended us or our families. And the definition of a victim is someone whose life is dramatically changed by that. We had some people who were actually victims. We had a girl in a wheelchair that got hit by a drunk driver. But if we have someone murder in a family, you're called survivor of homicide, is a criminal justice term for it. I went through that and I saw people's lives change. Had a guy in there that had killed someone. We sit in small groups, kind of a little bigger circle than that, but I think we had 6 or 7 in a group and 2 volunteers, and we had people that had been victimized. We tell our story up in front of the group and the impact of the crime. And we sit in the group and talk. This guy he denied it. And by the next to last meeting, he broke down and confessed, said he killed her, and he was sorry, and it's quite a thing. He ended up meeting with her mother, and it was very dramatic. His name was Ron. So that was the basis, and so then I kept feeling inspired to do something similar. And that was in the spring, and by November of that year, I made a decision to start Bridges to Life, which is our little brochure there talks about it. You can look at it later, but that was the name of our organization. It's about a bridge to life. You can see the color logo. The red is anger and the green is peace, and you walk across that bridge of change with God's light holding it up. Our missions really never changed. It was to try to bring the community together with victims and offenders and to help make a change in their life so they wouldn't come back to prison, or as many wouldn't come back. Our spiritual mission is to show them, victims and inmates, the transforming power of God's love and forgiveness. So on a kind of a hope and a prayer, we started that. It was very pioneering. The prison system looked at it as kind of, they go see a warden, you say, boy, there's no such thing as confidential conversations. You told them we meet. And so is the impact, the uniqueness of it was the victim impact and showing them, even if they committed a different crime, to show them what crime does and how it harms victims and try to develop some empathy. Because these guys I've never been around people with less empathy, and a lot of it's due to the way they were raised. And they had tough backgrounds. We never let their backgrounds excuse what they did. It helps them to understand why they did it, and it helps them to understand they can be forgiven. So we started in one prison in 1999, and we worked with 41 inmates, graduated from our program, which it was 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 14 meetings. We'll show you a video in just a minute that'll kind of show you more about what we do. But we started in one prison, 41 inmates. And I thought maybe we'd end up 5 or 6 prisons. Maybe get to Huntsville. We ended up going to Beaumont because that was the next prison the warden would let us in. And God was just really behind this, and it turned out growing tremendously. And we went from that one prison, 41. Now, 26 years later, we've been in 230 prisons, in 17 states, 5 foreign countries, and we've graduated 87,000 men and women, and it also impacts their families. So there's a lot of details between the first year and the 26, but it just kept. You can see God's hand in it all the time. We needed something. We've had about 4,000 volunteers through the year. We currently have about 750. The pandemic hit us real hard. When the pandemic hit, we had 950 people in prisons all over. We're building it back. We got back to 750 last year. So we're building back. We have a staff of 18, and that kind of grew person by person, adding people. And our staff is all in Texas in different regions, and they live near where they manage this program. So I think now would be an appropriate time. It's a 6-minute film. It's an excerpt from a 25-minute special that was done by kind of a streaming Christian group called Shalom, and they did a really great job. So I'm going to show 6 minutes, and best thing about it, I cut myself out of that. I've got all my people in this one, so anyway, y'all can see.
Engage a community inside the prison to bring hope and healing, regardless of your walk, regardless of your faith, regardless of your background. What can I do to serve these incarcerated men and women and change lives, change family dynamic?
How I got involved is due to the fact that I'm a victim of crime. My dad hired 2 men to kill my mom and 2 brothers and I, and my brothers and I did not get murdered, but my mom did. And about a year later, my dad was arrested and convicted, sentenced to the death penalty. And so I took Bridges for Life back in 2010 at the LeBlanc unit, TDCJ, and it was transforming for me. It was an amazing program. When I first went in, I think the thing that made the most impact was seeing the faithfulness of the volunteers who went in and week out and gave of their time. And it made me ask the question of myself, why would they leave their job, their family, their home to come visit me in prison? And I think out of all of the things that could have impacted me, it was seeing those volunteers come in, week out, share their stories of how they had been a victim of crime. And it helped to make me want to never hurt anyone ever again.
I had no idea what I was getting into. I just wanted to give it a try. But when I walked in and they closed those metal gates behind me the first time, I was wondering if I made a mistake. But I stayed with it, and then after I retired from teaching, a few years later, John Sage called me and asked me if I wanted to come work for Bridges for Life, and I said yes. So now when I recruit people, that's a part of my job, and sometimes it's difficult to recruit women because they always ask me if I'm afraid. And I always say, I am not afraid. They always say that Jesus does not call to prepare. He prepares those he called, and the way he prepared me was to take away all my fear and put the love in those men and the women that I wrote with into my heart. And really, that's what I found all that's necessary.
It helped me really open my heart. Like I'm not really a people person, or I like to talk about its own needs. But when I took Bridges, like it helped me realize that I had a lot of hurt and anger, mostly towards my father. But it helped me realize that I never really truly forgave him. So I took Bridges' life, and I was able to come to the surface of what's in my heart, and I was able to let that go.
We have to make changes in our life. It allowed me to confess a lot of the things that I've done, confess things that were done to me. Bridges of Life allowed me to look into my life and just pull out some of those darkest secrets that we keep bottled up and keep hidden, and allowed us to forgive and to ask for forgiveness for a lot of the things we've done.
This has been a very impactful program for me, for it gave me insight into some of the things that at one time I would not have looked into. And things that I've done, I've come to learn how to forgive myself. I thank John Sage for the program. I thank the volunteers for their coming and their participation and their support. And I thank all the victims that come in and share their stories. So I look forward to the day upon my release that I will be able to be reunited and joined again to society, so that I may one day be made an impact and be impactful in other people's lives.
I started volunteering as a speaker first, and then I started participating every week. We meet in small groups for about 2 hours. And what it looks like to participate is every volunteer and every offender receives a Restoring Peace book. And each week, the offenders will read the book and a chapter of the book. And it's really stories. It's crime victim stories as well as offender stories that have graduated our program. And the way that it's set up, they also get a study guide. And the Bridges for Life study guide, again, is 14 weeks. And every week, they will have a scripture reading, because we are a faith-based organization. Now, we're not trying to convert somebody to a particular faith, but we are faith-based. And so every week, there are scriptures that pertain to the topic. And our topics include accountability, responsibility, repentance, confession, forgiveness, reconciliation. And so each week, they will have some scriptures that pertain to the topic. And then there's a quote of the week, there's a word of the week, and then what happens is the offenders will answer the questions before they come to class. But the volunteer role is to facilitate a group discussion. So we're not there to lecture or preach, we're there to listen.
I gives you an idea how we put it together. The guy that was talking at the end is Jim Buffington. He's our COO. And when I get too tired, I guess he'll be the CEO. And then a couple of those people are regional coordinators, the lady in red and the big heavyset guy. And we have 13 of those regional coordinators stationed in different parts of Texas, so that's our business model. And they work on the prisons, 5 or 6 prisons in their area. And one of their main functions is recruiting volunteers, managing volunteers. And working in a prison is really tough. It's not like working in the free world. Everything takes more time, and you have to double check a lot of things, and their security is their main thing. A couple of things, and we'll open up for question and answer. When I first started working in the prisons, there's a word called recidivism, which means how many come back in 3 years. And that's kind of the standard in the United States, but Texas uses a 3-year study. And recidivism then, 26 years ago, was a lot higher than it is now. It was like 50%. So I said, where are all the future criminals? A lot of them are right here in prison. Can we do more? So that was the motivation. The gut motivation emotionally for me was to, really, I told the guys when I went up there to present it, keep another family going through what our family went through. And it's just sheer suffering and trauma and the pain. And so I felt like if I could do that, it was serving something. I had no idea how large it would get. That's the 2 biggest surprises to me, or how large it became. Just one thing after another, we grew organically in a manner that we could manage. The second biggest surprise is how much the volunteers receive from this. And not just the victim, about 25% of our volunteers have been affected by a serious crime. And so obviously it's kind of hard to get a person that's been affected by a crime that much to come into a prison. It's kind of a miracle that we got that many. And the other 75% are people, just everyday people that fortunately they might have had their hubcaps stolen, but they haven't been in a life-changing victim of a crime or a relative or a loved one. But how much all of those people, it's been life-changing for many of the people. A lot of our volunteers got gray hair like a lot of people in this room. We retired folks, a big percentage of retired folks are people that are aging, and of course we got young volunteers too, but people that have some wisdom of life. It's not hard technically to volunteer. You just have to show up is a big part of it. Showing up, listening, and asking questions. We developed this curriculum took 10 years to develop. We modified it for the first 10 years. And the book and the curriculum are very strong. They, as he said, they do homework. I brought 3 extra copies. I'm happy for anybody that's really interested to take a copy of the book and or study guide. You've got a brochure there that tells you about it. We always need volunteers. We lose volunteers just for life circumstances. We have volunteers that have been with us 5, 10 years, 20. We've got a couple that have been with us since the start, and they have to be in a project at that time. We give a little name tag out that says 10-year, every 5-year volunteer. We've got a lot of people that have been with us 10 years, and that's been one of the keys to us growing, as we always recruit. But we need volunteers. That's our biggest need, and if any of you have any serious interest in it, you can read the material, look at our website, bridgestolife.org, and give us a call, and we would put you in touch. There's 2 regional coordinators in this Houston area, because there's a lot of prisons. And Texas turned out to be a great place to start this because we have more prisons than anybody. We got the highest prison population. We got the biggest death row. That's a whole nother subject. But just to follow up, the male killer died 5 years later of AIDS, but he didn't have a relationship with the female killer. She's still on death row 30-something years later. It took 28 years to go through all the appeals through the Supreme Court, which is an unbelievable, lengthy process.
At the time, there was no life without parole. And we all wanted the death penalty because we didn't want another family to go through this. But I don't think Johnny mentioned that Bridges to Life is in 7 countries?
Yeah.
Helen, Australia, and
Well, it's been used, the curriculum is used in Australia, Uganda, South Africa. We've done quite a bit in Mexico, a little bit in Canada, and it's been, I think in Thailand, it was the interpreted in their language. So Mexico's
This
probably
is just
the place
like
for
Marilyn,
language.
because she was always giving, and even in her death, she just keeps giving and giving and giving. And you really don't see it when you're in the midst of a trauma. Your mind, That night, I think back to that night, I think back to the weeks following, and people don't know what to say to you. I learned a lot about what to say to people when they lose someone, and Suzanne Messersmith was one of the few people. Our kids were at Second Baptist, and in that parking lot, I'll never forget, we sat in her car, and she just let me cry and listened, and some people, they want to help, but they don't have the capacity, they don't know what to say. It's so horrific. You're at your kids' games, and they don't even want to look at you. So I did learn a lot about, don't say they're in a better place. I mean, don't say this was God's will. It's just, there are things, just be there. Marilyn used to always say, half of life is showing up. Come to this party with me, Helen, come. We can do 3 parties tonight and during the holidays. Anyway, with that, I guess we'll open up.
She's right, yeah. One more thing that's important. On that recidivism, now the national average is about 30%. Prisons have done a lot. They did a lot of, they let go of a lot of nonviolence, California and other places. Bridges to Life, the last study we did was 9,000 inmates over a 5-year period. And our recidivism rate was 11%. So only 11%, 89% of them are not coming back to prison in that study. And it's a huge economic impact. Huge, I'm talking millions and millions, and over the course of 26 years, based on studies and estimates of the cost of prison and all the other costs, I would say over $1 billion in tax savings, because we've done the volume we've done. You know, if we save 5% reduction, multiply that times 87,000.
What does it cost to put one person through?
The average term and the cost is about $120,000 to just incarceration costs. I'm not talking about any of the judicial system, police or parole or any of that. Just locking somebody up and housing them is about $25,000 a year. An average sentence is 4.5 years. So it's just a very costly thing, and it's society is hurt by it. But I think we've done a lot of good. I'm really pleased with it. I'm really pleased with our curriculum and what we do. It follows on point the teachings of Jesus. I mean, the subtopics that he enumerated, it's right there. And I think that's the reason it's been blessed. Y'all may have some questions about, we got about 15, about prisons or what we do, and you can direct your questions to either here, Helen. I think I'll sit down and answer.
Big room.
We have a grandson that's in prison in Utah. And with that material, would we be able to mail that to him, and he could work it on his own if he wanted to?
Yes, you can look on our website. There's a place to order books. You got to do some drop downs, and you can. We will mail it. We are the publisher, so we can mail into a prison. If you bought it and mailed it to him, it probably wouldn't work.
Well, I don't know.
But you can buy it. It's not. I mean, I think it's counting mailing and everything. $20 for the 2 books and the mailing, and give us his name and his number and address, and it all is online. We have a lady that handles it.
Because I've discovered you can't put anything in an envelope. There was an article of a man in Houston that served, he lived in prison for in and out his whole life, and then when he was actually finally in his 60s, I can't remember his name, it was in the paper, and I cut the article out, sent it to Christian. He didn't get it. They took it out of the envelope and they wouldn't give him the book. And I had sent him a book on grace. So if y'all could send it, it just might be something.
Can't guarantee anything in prison, but I know in Texas, we've sent many of them into the prisons. And by the way, Utah has the lowest incarceration per capita in the country. The Mormons take care of their people pretty well as far as that. But anyway, it's something we can do, and it's not hard to get done. And we get quite a few orders, but a lot of the orders are a family of men taking the program, whether it's in Texas or somewhere else.
I'm Grant, formerly incarcerated. Thank y'all for your testimony today. And word this for a friend of mine, his parents, Gary and Melinda Rickenbacher, are going through, their son was murdered by a hit-on collision, and they're thinking of giving the gentleman probation instead of the death penalty. And so they're taking it real hard. So I thank y'all, and I think this will definitely help them to get through the hurt they have for the judicial system.
Yeah, you can take a copy of that, and if you, I only can bring so many, but if you can order the book for yourself, we'll mail it to you or anybody else. And there's a whole lot between probation and the death penalty. Seems like they can give him some reasonable sentence short of the death penalty. But is that here in Texas?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry for
That's
their,
Harris County.
sorry for their loss. So you probably understand what we've been formerly incarcerated, understand what we do. It was good to see you in here instead of there.
Frank share period, it really helps, and really helps stay here. I've been for Chuck Colson's group for many years, and then was the one with prisoners' families and children, something angels. Anyway,
Angel Tree, they give them the kids presents.
Angel Tree.
That's part of Colson's.
and those are separate contributions, so
Right.
I've been following up for years, but it's a shock to lose somebody and get the call. What if you get the call and your loss is murder and it's a family member? Okay, in Sugar Land here in about 2010, my fraternity brother and wife took their son, supposedly graduating in Huntsville, of all places, at St. Mission. And came home and I had a Rolex watch on and everything. Turns out he was into drugs and of course the wife was killed and the brother was killed. And so this is the Europeans that saw a murder by family. So that happened right here at Sugar Land, or down the road here. So what did they do? He was a devout Christian, as well as a deceased mom. And so they focus in on forgiveness, which is a different thing than you're doing, but really that's how so they have a separate ministry, and it's called Bigger Picture Ministries, and it's Kim and Tanya Whitaker. Tanya's he remarried, but Barbara's still in Huntsville, but now on death row. Of all things, the governor of Texas commuted his death penalty according to the wishes of the family, which was really remarkable. This just never happens. And he's still there committed to a life sentence, Mark Whitaker. Anyway, Bigger Picture Ministries, I wish you'd check that out and see. It doesn't duplicate what you're doing in any way, but their message is forgiveness has to be number one, as it was to Christ's own teaching.
Thank you. We both know Kent well. Kent was actually a volunteer with Bridges to Life there was a 2-year period where they couldn't solve the case because the boy was down in Mexico and he volunteered. But he's great. That's great. But I just say forgiveness and repentance are probably in the bullseye of what we do. It's one of the topics in the book. But we feel like you can't start out with forgiveness. You got to kind of open them up and take responsibility as the first step, but most of them don't want to take responsibility. So.
I have a question. Thank you for your testimony. So you spoke on how showing up is one of the biggest things you can do. In that situation, through your experience, what can you say to someone that's going through that situation apart from being there? What have you experienced that actually helps or has some kind of movement inside your lives? What's something that y'all can suggest to us?
Every person's different. I had a business to run, and I was a single mom with 3 boys. So the bills keep coming, the dishes the groceries the meals need to be made. It could be putting on your rubber gloves and going over and just, Mom always said you spell love T-I-M-E, but being intuitive and really looking at a situation and looking around and seeing what they need and pitching in, and can I go take your car and get it washed and filled up? Can I run some errands for you? Because life keeps going on. It doesn't stop because you're in the middle of a trauma. To forgiveness, it took me about 7 years to forgive. I heard Adolf Kohr speak at Second Baptist, and his father was murdered. And he had a lot of people praying for him, and I had a lot of hands-on prayer, and it was a process. But I think being intuitive and asking the Holy Spirit to lead you in specifically what a person's needs are. If they've got so much food that's coming out the refrigerator, that's really not what they need. They may need you to disperse it somewhere. Or maybe they have pets that need help. It's the everyday things that you just, the trauma does such a mind, I would lose keys, and grief makes you really stupid. But Ephesians, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there be any moral excellence, if there be any praiseworthy, dwell on these things. So helping a person to dwell on those things.
Yeah, but I agree with everything you said. Just show up, tell them you're going to pray for them, pray with them, and practical things you can help them with. But don't say too much. But you sometimes can say too many, and things that she mentioned later. I know what you're going through. You really don't unless you've been through it. They're in a better place. Those kind of things are not helpful at that time because they're in a tough place. But just walk with them.
If I can, just for a second, a couple of things that I'm pulling out here today. One is how cathartic this process is for somebody who's gone through loss. I can't imagine how impactful that was for y'all to have the opportunity to go through the grieving process, and also how it brings to light to those criminals that sense of responsibility and the nature that they have to kind of build within themselves to recover their humanity. But the thing that kind of grabs me that I don't hear talking about is that what I've seen as a grown adult now is the absence of us allowing them to have that responsibility, accept that responsibility through our judicial system. How it's kind of negating the idea that these people need to be held responsible and put them back out in the street. I like your reduction in the recidivism rate, but
One thing that hasn't been mentioned that I wanted to say that hit me the first time I went to a prison, this victim may have robbed a pharmacy or something, and he goes on and he doesn't think that that pharmacist is 3 years later having nightmares. And so the dynamic, and the warden said this will never work, victims and offenders. But when they look into the face of a victim and they see the pain that crime has caused, it doesn't have to be their crime. They don't even think about it a lot of times, do they? That until they really
No, I mean,
see a
like, the
victim.
death penalty is not a deterrent. They don't think about it, I might go get executed. The whole system, as you say, teaches them to deny it. Their lawyers tell them to do it. I mean, the whole system. In prison, they don't talk to each other about their crime, but we're contrary to that whole, this group, our small groups are 10 inmates and 2 volunteers, and we may have 5 small groups in a project, and they admit this, and many of them, this is the first time I've ever taken responsibility, the first time I've ever told this. They tell us other things about their background, and many of them had horrible, horrible childhoods and things, and we listen to it. They're often victims themselves, but we give them a platform to talk. Most classes in prison, they're just teaching them, talking to them, preaching at them, whatever. They are actually really involved, and they just get this weight. You can watch this weight come off their shoulders, and their eyes change, and their physical change, and they have they talk about freedom. Any of you would want to, it takes about a month notice now, come to our 14th week, which is a graduation, and about half of it is them getting up giving 2-3 minute testimonies, and very powerful.
Everybody should go to a prison once. When those metal doors close, it's really something.
I went to a prison when I was in college. I was at the city union, and we went to the Colorado State Prison, and I concluded at that time that that was not the ministry God was calling me to. One time of walking around in the prison with guards up there with guns was enough for me at 18, 19 years old. But I work in a ministry here called Stephen Ministry, and we deal with the victims mostly because people want someone to walk with them. What you're saying is the volunteers that come in to work with your prisoners to lead a group like this guy does, that the most important thing that we see as a comment for us is that we meet every week or however long it takes with that person that is our care receiver. And they'll come back over and over and over again and say that the most important thing we did with them is not our words. It was we showed up week after week. So what you're saying about your volunteers is what that says to the prisoners is someone cares enough to keep showing up. They don't just come one time like I did and decide that's not my ministry. They keep coming. And a lot of, I would assume a lot of the prisoners have never had anyone consistently care enough to show up.
Exactly. At first, they didn't think we were going to come back when we first started doing this.
They really are the least of the least. And
Yeah, they gives them value. If you're going to spend your time and gas, go out there and instead of staying home watching sports or TV, it intrinsically gives them value. And but really trying to give them hope. I had a recent kind of epiphany about faith, hope, and love. And love is the greatest. And why is love the greatest? When we go in, just in our case, we show them love. And that's really the first thing we show them by showing up. And if you show someone love, then they're willing to listen to you about faith. And the real goal for them is hope. They've lost hope. If you lose hope, you're in a bad place. I understand why in those dark places they lose hope. But all of them, particularly the guys on death row, man, it's bringing hope to them in a process. And showing up is the biggest part of it. I got fortunate enough, I spent some time with Sister Helen Perry on the way back when I started this. She said, showing up, it's a ministry of presence. And we tell our volunteers, 14 weeks in a row, and if you know you're going to miss more than 2 starting off, you probably ought not do this because of travel. You're going to end up maybe missing one because of something comes up in your family or something. But presence, and most of them have high attendance. And like I say, it's a ministry for them. And it's amazing to sit there and watch God working somebody's life over a very short time. There was a University of Texas social or tenured professor that did our program and went around talking in the secular conferences. They wouldn't believe it. They said, you can't have an intervention that's less than 6 months have any impact. But they didn't have the spiritual element.
We got time for one more. Quick question. A friend of mine is trying to bring into Colombia, Indonesia, something like this, but he just wants to see if he can get into the prisons first and then have an idea. How did y'all get into other countries?
Step by step, and that is the first step, because we had a guy in Utah get the team together and everything else, and the prisons wouldn't let him in, so that was a while back. But it's just a story, kind of each one is different. Texas, at first we had to kind of beg to get in, and now we're in all the prisons in Texas, they all want us. A good warden understands it makes his prison safer. If he can improve the behavior, it makes his guards safer, it makes his prison safer, and it can change the culture of a prison if we're doing that well.
Do the guards ever take the class?
No, they don't take it, but we have some that pay attention to it. We've had some that, particularly some of the female guards in the female prisons, they listen to the graduation and all. We don't allow the guards to come into the groups. We have some problems with that because the guys won't open up if guards are in.
But you can tell the difference in the other population and the Bridges to Life offenders.
Hi, I'm Nancy. You actually did a makeover of me at Sweetwater Country Club.
Hi, Nancy.
I too am one of 8 children, and I used to always say I lost 2 sisters, but they were both murdered at the hands of doctors.
They were what?
Doctors?
Both murdered at the hands of doctors. The one that was
sorry.
in 1957. She only lived one day, and it was because the doctor was selfish and wanted to go on a deer hunting trip and induced labor, and her lungs weren't developed, so he basically murdered her. But in 57, he didn't say anything against the doctor. And the one that gave birth to twins, and the doctor wasn't watching her, and she ended up having a seizure about 2 hours after the twins were born. And then at midnight, she had a grand mal seizure, and it literally separated her brainstem from her body, and she died only holding the twins once. You know, my brother-in-law was an assistant DA, and his friends who were lawyers jumped on that, and they did sue and won the lawsuit, but it didn't bring my sister back.
No, it doesn't.
You know, and it just, that one was the hardest for me because she was
It's
only
really
a
hard
year.
losing a sibling. You came from the same place.
I know.
It's a different dynamic. Your parents, all, but didn't you feel that there was something?
Yeah, it's the only thing I see that's more difficult as a parent, having a child murdered. That's, they end up almost dying from the grief.
We thank y'all so much.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to close this out.